a drugs bust in small-town New Zealand.
They knocked on the door. We weren't dressed, so they waited at the door until we put some clothes on. My partner went out, told them that this was all hers. They took her pretty straight away to the police station, seized both our cell phones. I sat here for hours while they went through the house.
Last September, Gary and Mel's lives changed.
It's broken me a bit. I have sleepless nights. I haven't slept very well for almost a year since this actually happened. Just the fact that I feel violated, destroyed inside.
I lost my job because of this. They come in, it just makes everything look like the light shine on you, you are the baddies. You're the baddies in this little town, when in actual fact, I can assure you, we are far from that.
Like these things so often are, Gary and Mel's situation is complicated. The police raid targeted their illicit cannabis operation. Mel says she was growing cannabis for herself and to supply friends with health issues. Now she's facing multiple drugs charges. Gary, who has previous cannabis convictions, has also been charged, though he says this time none of the plants were his. In fact, he has a prescription to access medicinal cannabis legitimately. And how did you feel when you found out that you were going to be facing those charges?
Sick, full of grief, just at my wit's end.
In 2019, a law change was introduced to deal with the deadly synthetics crisis.
The current approach has not been keeping Kiwis safe, so we're not going to continue with it.
The changes formalise police discretion, essentially decriminalising low-level drug use. A health-based approach was in, criminalising drug users was out, or so it seemed. But even back then, experts warned that police discretion might not be applied equally.
So this reform that's going to be put in place, we have to make sure it's evenly applied.
For some people, the secondary harm of a drug charge is worse than the drug charge itself.
The arrests, the prosecutions are just so out of whack with the way they should be. And in fact, I've started to look at it as a form of racism.
4 years on, those fears have played out. New figures show that last year more than 1,000 people were convicted for cannabis use or possession, 49% of them Māori. While the overall number of people prosecuted for cannabis possession has been dropping, the proportion of Māori is on the rise. And for the first time, the actual number of Māori convicted has overtaken Pākehā. The charges Gary and Mel face go beyond just possession and use, but they question why they were raided when others, some with larger operations, have been passed over by police.
It needs to be sorted.
Why do you think they decided to target you two?
They seem to just have this idea that we are going to be in that kind of world where drugs are part of our culture.
The head of the Drug Foundation says blame for the increasing inequity sits with all parts of the justice sector, not just police. You're Ngāi Tahu.
Hi.
How does it make you feel when you see these statistics?
Very depressed. We work with Indigenous people around the world, and it's the same story in pretty much every country. So we're getting it wrong. We're getting it wrong for Māori in particular. We're getting it wrong for everyone. We can do better. If we try and do better for Māori and we try and do better, we will end up doing better for everyone, essentially.
We wanted to ask those in charge whether the law is working as intended. Instead, we were given ringside seats to a game of pass the hot potato. The Justice Minister said responsibility for this law sits with the Health Minister. The Health Minister referred us to the Police Minister. The Police Minister told us she couldn't comment on operational matters. All roads lead to police, but our multiple requests for interviews were denied. Instead, police provided this written statement saying they are committed to improving outcomes for Māori and that there is no evidence to suggest that Māori receive a higher proportion of drug prosecutions than other ethnic groups. However, this is contradicted by the government's own data, which shows Māori make up 45% of these types of charges, but just 17% of our general population. Since the failed cannabis referendum, it seems no one wants to touch the issue of drug reform. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick was one of the politicians who fronted the push for greater discretion. So, does she take some responsibility?
I was really clear in 2019 that what the Greens were fighting for was decriminalisation. I have said for the past 5 years that the Misuse of Drugs Act is abhorrent.
Swarbrick says these outcomes were entirely predictable.
If you are enabling discretion, you are potentially going to open the door to the human element of potential discrimination.
4 years on, it's up to politicians to sort it out.
Many politicians are on the record admitting to using illicit substances back in the mists of time, but they now oversee laws which penalise, prosecute and ruin the lives of people who are doing exactly the same things that they once did.
Meanwhile, people are suffering, and that's the opposite of what this law change intended.
Yeah, I think for me we've put our faces on national TV to expose what's happening to small guys like us. It's going to impact in terms of employment because now people know who I am, will see this face and they are going to judge.